Welcome back to Navigating Sports Business. I'm Charles Rolston, joined once again by our founder, AJ Maestas. AJ, great to have you.
Thank you for having me.
Today, we're wading into the biggest fight in college sports right now, the Protect College Sports Act. And Congress says that it's trying to save collegiate athletics, but what we're going to dive in today is whether they're actually saving the sport or just freezing it in place. And a quick catch up for all our listeners before we dig in. This bill has been a moving target all week. Lawmakers met with SEC and Big Ten stakeholders last week, said they'd go back to the table, revise the bill with some of their common sense improvements. And now we're actually getting a first look at what some of those revisions are. And it's all happening in the most scrutinized part of the act, the realignment restrictions. And as reported by Ross Dellinger this morning, the latest revisions say that conferences would be capped at 19 schools. In context, for any of our listeners, the Big Ten is currently at 18 institutions, and the SEC is at 16 football playing institutions. So there's almost really no runway left for those two conferences. And on top of that, any program that wants to jump from one power conference to another would have to sit out 5 years as an independent before it could join. Now, we're still in the wake of the latest realignment cycle and how that's impacted the collegiate athletics ecosystem more broadly. So, AJ, let's dive into this. What do you think about the realignment provision within the bill generally? And then what are your thoughts about the parameters that lawmakers have put in place as of this morning to stifle movement?
Well, I understand why they want to do that. They feel that certain conferences have been left behind or harmed and what have you. And it might seem, chaotic, but I don't like the idea of freezing it in place as it is now. I think it's in a significant moment of evolution, the sport as a whole. I think there's some things about the geographic sort of footprint and alignment right now that time will sort out, but holding on to it or creating major hurdles right now would not be healthy. So unfair for those schools that want to find themselves there. I believe in reasons they would want to regulate movement, but not eliminate it. I could see transition payments or some sort of fair system of financial implications, so it's not destroying a conference on the way in or out and what have you. I can see windows, almost like free agency windows. I could see an independent review just to make sure, that some unintended consequence isn't a major problem. But yeah, I wouldn't eliminate optionality. That'd be like saying, boy, we just love the alignment right now and everything seems sorted out perfectly. So I would say Congress should protect competition, but not every competitor. We're a free market country, right? There are some things that deserve to sort themselves out here. So yeah, guardrails and systems and possible regulation, but not hard and fast rules like that. Not a fan, and I hope that changes here.
And I'll caveat that this is a fluid document, and we might see changes to this by the end of the afternoon, but when I look at it, the work that we've done with various conferences on football scheduling, odd numbers are a no-go zone to begin with. 19 is a difficult number to be able to schedule a fair conference play. But I think the more surprising thing is the 5-year independent runway needed in order to actually transition to a new conference. And I think the only one, Notre Dame, is essentially grandfathered into this rule, as we've heard through some other reporting. But do you think that any other institution, whether it be Florida State, Miami, North Carolina, ones that have been in the rumor mill as of recent as potentially, looking to leapfrog into the Power Two, this 5 years of independence is going to be difficult, not only from a financial standpoint, but from having to schedule all their Olympic sports. Do you think that this is something that would be reasonable if it were put into law, that some of these schools would actually say, hey, we're willing to bite the bullet for 5 years as long as this does secure our future?
It's tough. It's not impossible to find schedules and work that out, but that's putting such a burden on the student athlete. So we're going to punish kids, to sort of prevent the institution from being a place it should be. And you named some of the schools that are obvious targets to move up to a stronger conference or what have you. But keep in mind things like Cal and Stanford. I mean, do we really want to lock them into the West Coast? They've already punished themselves by taking a haircut to be a part of the ACC. Then they would go through another 5-year cycle if they suddenly got the chance to be better geographically aligned or something like that. Yeah, I don't like it. I understand what they're trying to do, but I think there's a better way to go about that. And if you look at the fluid nature of realignment, each time a television deal comes up, there's a lot more movement than people realize. It has a cascading effect. If you look around the world and the number of participants in a given league, it's pretty clear that this is not a mature state that we're in college athletics. nor is there any league, I think, with more than 32 members in it anywhere in the world. And we have over 130 members in at least the top level of football at the moment. So it's just not realistic. So oof, boy, think of any industry when regulation has come in and put in hard and fast rules. Have they created the right incentives and have they allowed for growth? Do we think we've reached a mature state? I don't think so. I think you got to leave some room for movement there. And I'm not even talking about members of some of these conferences that they don't look like the others on the negative end of the scale. Should they really, why is University X in the Big Ten or SEC and University Y prevented from being in there? I think there's better solutions. And again, some guardrails essentially is what I would personally recommend. But yeah, naming the number, really unfortunate what this would mean for so many schools with these aspirations. Wouldn't you want to incentivize those? Wouldn't you want to reward these schools for investing that see this incredible alignment with college athletics? I really hope this is an element that changes. Yeah.
I'm really glad that you brought up Cal and Stanford because, they are slighted a few different times in these bills based off their future, in this bill based off future optionality. So assuming that the actual realignment movement aspect of the bill does stifle them from moving into another more geographically fit conference, the mechanisms within the media rights pooling actually targets their minimum guarantee to a period of time where they're receiving discounted payments compared to their peers in the ACC. For those that don't know, just a quick primer, essentially, if there was collective pooling across the FBS, then all schools would essentially be guaranteed the highest media rights distribution between 2001 and 2020, or 2021 and 2025. And for Stanford, for Cal, for SMU, for a number of other institutions, that's a period of time where they took in a junior membership payment compared to their peers. So what do you think Cal and Stanford are thinking about right now? I know they were forced into an extremely tough position during the last realignment cycle, but seeing some of the provisions within this bill, they got to be pretty upset, don't you think?
Oh yeah, without question. And honestly, I'd hate for us even to belabor the point because you can never underestimate lawmakers doing something silly for some funny reason. But the idea that schools would be locked in what they're earning now. Washington and Oregon are half share in the Big Ten. I think Oklahoma and Texas are still in transition to the SEC. There'd be so many universities where it makes no sense that they're locked into their current state. So again, there's plenty of mechanisms to sort of adjust, right? Or so we'll see what's happening, right? Like this negotiation is taking place as we're talking. So hopefully reasonable minds come to a more reasonable place, but more than just the economics for the Cal and Stanford situation, or think of all the group of 6 universities that aspire to be at that higher level someday and are making investments to do so. And I would argue the only way you could sustainably finance an athletic department in the future is to play at the highest level that you reasonably can reach. At the lower levels, the economics are even worse. And you don't get the benefits that accrue to a university from the exposure and the visibility and the schedule and what have you. So look how people are spending their money. They're making all out efforts to play at the highest level. And I agree with that. I think that's the right playbook. And then to just sort of pull the rug out from underneath them, I'm not a fan of that. It's clearly not in a current mature state. The geographic map is silly in some scenarios. You just have to leave room for some natural evolution here.
So let's take a step back and look at the document as a whole. I mean, obviously, this type of bill has been floating around for a number of years, and the real catalyst behind this is the disparity between football roster costs and NIL. And you have institutions within the same conference that are spending upwards of $40 million on their football rosters versus ones that are spending, between 10 and 15 million. And most coverage of the Protect College Sports Act are really kind of asking whether this is a good NIL bill, but you think that's the wrong question, don't you?
I mean, in the pro sports world, collective bargaining has you looking at compensation and the share as a percent of revenue every few years. Legislation like this, it could be generational. So very scary to lock it in. The second thing I'd say about that is, it's not just NIL they're looking to fix here, but are they even fixing it in the right way? A free and open market, as you see in the pro sports leagues in the US, tends to be about 50 cents on the dollar goes to athletes. And this is about half that. You could argue that the right place to land here is a cap of 40 million per year, not 20 million as the current NCAA House settlement, settles on. And what does that lead to? When you constrain a natural market, it leads to black markets. And what black market do we have here? Ridiculous NIL that has nothing to do with endorsements, but is packaged and made to seem as if it is. And look at the numbers. If you look at the ratio of endorsement or NIL deals in college athletics relative to other pro sports, it's off the charts. It's silly. It's very clearly pay for play. It's very clearly circumnavigating, the rules to be competitive with your roster. So I think some honesty and being realistic about that percent share that goes to athletes is appropriate. But, you asked, is this more than an NIL bill? Sure, it is. There are so many things here that people need, right? Some form of antitrust protection or whatever it can then give them some air cover for legal risk. They can't do anything, right? Because they lose every lawsuit that pops up. So there's got to be some controls. I mean, you think of free agency windows and NIL and transfer, and are these kids even going to graduate? And you think there are plenty of elements of this that are really healthy and really good. I just worry that it may go too far and sort of locking in economics and saying, okay, now we've got it. We're in a mature state, which we clearly are not. We're in a very transitional phase.
I mean, the intentions are good here, as with most of these bills, stability over chaos, air cover from future legal risk. I mean, these are things that all these institutions want, whether you're in the SEC or the Big Ten, or you're in the group of six. But why do you think that the SEC and the Big Ten are really pushing back so hard on this right now before we might actually see it get voted on?
The bundling thing, there was versions of this that kind of indicated, bundling of rights. And as you know, at Navigate, we think those positive outcomes are overstated. If I'm not mistaken, the public comments we've heard from some of the folks involved with this have said, that at the next cycle, a decade from now, there'd be twice as much money from bundling as there would be if they stay this way. We don't agree with that. I think that's significantly overstated. There are benefits to bundling, but not at that magnitude. A second reason, and to answer your question about the SEC and Big Ten, is that those benefits would disproportionately accrue to the Big Ten or SEC if they were separate. You see the blockbuster effect across all of sport and entertainment and business. The money is flowing toward the most prestigious and attractive brands and larger group audiences, and that's where sponsorships go, and that's what drives distribution. And by any measure, the growth rate would be much higher for the SEC and Big Ten in future television deals than other conferences. So it looks like a subsidy, and so I'd push against that, right? You see the speed of rules and governance and what have you. I mean, it'd be much easier to govern yourself as an independent conference, and you'd be this super valuable entity. So yeah, I mean, I think it's very legitimate. If I'm sitting in their seats, I'm asking myself, why I don't just go do this on my own versus live under governance that's pushed down from Congress? Yeah, for sure. That would be a really strong thesis of mine, is why is this not better? And the only thing I think they can offer them that's significant benefit-wise is antitrust protection, right? A legal shield. Otherwise, of course, you unquestionably would. Yeah, you'd go out on your own.
Yeah. I mean, we saw Commissioner Sankey get asked the question about self-governance today, and he says that the presidents and chancellors of the institutions within the SEC are certainly considering that option. Why wouldn't they?
I do think the conversation is constantly floating toward media and capturing those media dollars. Not only do we not believe the potential gain is near as much as being stated out there, but that is the bucket of revenue that is closest to optimized. So our math indicates that college athletics captures about 57 cents on the dollar, as would a pro team with the same amount of fans, interest, ratings, loyalty, what have you. So if you think about that, it's unfair as a measure because these are not-for-profit institutions with many stakeholders and other, goals and what have you. So they're not pro sports teams, but of the buckets, let's call it sponsorships and ticket revenue and media revenue and licensing and what have you, the closest thing to what we see as fair or optimized market value are the television deals. So the place to go looking is actually those other buckets. So there's a lot of places where, universities could look inward to bootstrap their way to greater revenue. And again, I don't know if freezing some of these sort of systems in place actually helps, the universities do that.
I think we've hit the high notes on what is most important and on people's mind. But AJ, is there anything else? What's one question that listeners should leave with after listening to us talk about this today?
Yeah, I would ask, can you indefinitely run a professional business inside an amateur governance model? I think the answer is no, right? So let's have room for this to sunset, or let's create flexibility. Are you creating a situation that creates more value? Are athletes being treated more fairly? Is there an incentive and encouragement for innovation and change? I think there's very much a way to preserve what college athletics is and what makes it special, but to create the proper incentives and space for it to evolve and grow. So can this be something better than it is today? I think the answer is yes, but I would not freeze 2026 college athletics into federal law. That, I think, hopefully most people would agree with that. You'd say, oh no, this thing is in transition right now. Obviously not. If they try to, we'll just be back in Washington having the same conversation in a few years, and schools will breathe this sigh of relief and think, okay, well, we have these new rules we're operating under. We're good now like this. And then chaos again.
Well, I think we should probably end this with a prediction. I think that's what a lot of people are potentially looking for. I listened to a podcast this morning with Ross Dellinger and John Canzano, and Ross mentioned that the bill is still technically early. He put it at step 3 of 10 into becoming law, but then also mentioned that, it's probably a 50-50 shot that it actually does pass Congress. And maybe he knows a little bit more about some of the latest revisions and how that might appease SEC and Big Ten stakeholders. But realistically, there's a critical deadline coming up. It's the August Senate recess. And he mentioned if it doesn't pass the Senate before then the chances of it becoming law during this Congress this Congress, that it actually falls significantly. And so we might just kick the can down the road another year. Now, do you think that lawmakers and politicians are incentivized enough to find something that makes all of the FBS institutions happy enough for this to actually get put into law before this August?
Okay, well, I think the answer is yes, because they don't have to live with it. It's not their problem once it's set into law. They're just worried about votes, right? And what keeps them in office and making sure their constituency is happy. So, yeah, I think so, especially because I feel like a lot of people out there believe the bundling of these rights will bring all this new media money, again, which we're skeptical of. And you know why we're skeptical, right? There's only so many times lots on a Saturday. We have talked with media executives, the leaders of these key media companies that don't see value in that. So if they continue to believe there's 2x media value by doing this, and so not only can they bring rules and regulation, but it'll also pay for itself, yeah, that'll pass. And maybe I'm wrong, maybe we're wrong, right? And the money is there from the media side. So yeah, I'm going to guess that it passes because it's getting so much time and attention, and you do the best you can. They're not going to reach perfection. I hope they make a lot of the changes that we discussed today, but I'll say, yeah, it gets across the finish line because everyone recognizes it's a big problem and it's bipartisan, right? So I'd say a lot of changes, it passes.
I'm gonna take the other side of this.
Oh, good.
And the main reason for that is because we heard about these productive meetings with the SEC and Big Ten last week, and then what do we see on Monday? We see a revision to the realignment provision, which is obviously one of the most contested provisions within the bill, that says that conferences are capped at 19, and any school that wants to move from one power conference to the other needs to be an independent for 5 years. I just think that when, the SEC and Big Ten stakeholders saw that, they said, well, these guys didn't listen to us at all. So I think unless that leaked for a certain reason to influence certain people, that I can't foresee right now, I think that we're still pretty far away from getting SEC and Big Ten support on this. And I don't think that this is even going to be brought into a session without them supporting the bill pretty consistently. So I think we're taking two opposite ends of this prediction. I feel bad about it because I feel like we're just going to be talking about this again next year, or we could be talking about SEC and Big Ten self-governance, which will be an interesting podcast in itself. But I think that's enough for today. This was supposed to be a quick take, and it ended up running even longer than we thought because there's just so much to talk about. But it's fluid. It's changing every day. As new revelations do come to light, we'll be sure to talk about it and keep you up to date as much as possible. But thanks again for listening to Navigating Sports Business, and we will see you next time.